Prepare for the worst? Why Zambia's 2026 election could change everything. Sishuwa Sishuwa. Zambia has held many elections, some peaceful, some contested, but according to political historian Sishuwa Sishuwa, the 2026 election may be fundamentally different, more tense, more uncertain, and potentially more dangerous. Why is one of Zambia's leading scholars warning citizens to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best, and what exactly makes 2026 unlike any election before it? Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. Hope you're all having a wonderful start to your week. We've got some critically important news coming out of Southern Africa today that I believe demands our immediate attention. Our lead story tonight: a democratic storm is brewing in Zambia, and the warnings are coming from inside the house. Picture this. A nation once celebrated as a beacon of peaceful democratic transitions in Africa now stands at a precipice. The country's most prominent political historian, a man who has dedicated his career to documenting Zambia's democratic journey, is sounding an alarm so urgent, so unsettling, that it cannot be ignored. What happens when a government that came to power on promises of democratic renewal begins to deploy the very tactics it once condemned? When does legitimate governance cross the line into authoritarian control? And when the watchdogs, the historians, the journalists, the civil society leaders start warning of democratic backsliding, at what point do we stop dismissing their concerns as mere political paranoia? Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa, one of Zambia's most respected voices on democracy and governance, has issued a stark warning: prepare for the worst in 2026. But what does the worst look like? Are we talking about electoral manipulation? Violence? A descent into the kind of authoritarianism that has plagued other African nations? And here's the most chilling question of all: if Zambia, stable, democratic Zambia, can slide backward, what does that mean for the future of democracy across the entire continent? What lessons are other leaders learning as they watch this unfold? And most importantly, is there still time to change course? Factual foundation, background and timeline. The revelation came to light through a powerful social media post that has since ignited fierce debate across Zambian political circles and beyond. Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa, a senior lecturer in history at the University of Zambia and one of the country's foremost political commentators, published his concerns on January 25, 2026, just months before Zambia's crucial 2026 general elections. The timing is no coincidence. To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to step back to August 2021. That's when President Hakainde Hichilema and his United Party for National Development, the UPND, swept to power in what was widely celebrated as a democratic triumph. They defeated the incumbent Edgar Lungu and the Patriotic Front in an election that seemed to prove African democracy was alive and well. Hichilema, a successful businessman and opposition leader who had lost 5 previous elections, finally claimed victory with promises of economic reform, anti-corruption measures, and democratic accountability. The international community applauded. Zambians celebrated in the streets. But now, less than 5 years later, Dr. Sishuwa, who was among those who supported the democratic change in 2021, is raising red flags about that very same government. The warning didn't emerge in a vacuum. Over the past months, there have been growing concerns about the UPND government's approach to dissent, its handling of opposition voices, and troubling patterns that echo the very behaviors they once criticized in the Patriotic Front. Dr. Sishuwa's post specifically called out what he sees as dangerous parallels: a government using state machinery not to serve the people, but to entrench power. The accusation is serious. That the UPND is not just governing, but actively preparing to manipulate the 2026 electoral process. Direct evidence, quotes and testimony. Let me read you Dr. Sishuwa's words directly, because they carry a weight that cannot be paraphrased away. Prepare for the worst in 2026, he wrote. The UPND government is not mobilizing to win the 2026 elections, it is, instead, actively preparing to rig them. Think about that for a moment. This is not an opposition politician making routine accusations. This is an academic, a historian who has built his reputation on careful analysis and scholarly integrity. He continued, President Hichilema and the UPND are using the same repressive tactics they condemned when employed by the Patriotic Front. The playbook has not changed, only the players have. Dr. Sishuwa elaborated on specific concerns, stating, "We are seeing the weaponization of state institutions. The police, the judiciary, the electoral commission. Institutions that should be independent arbiters are being deployed as instruments of political control." In response to questions about whether he was being alarmist, Dr. Sishuwa doubled down, "I take no pleasure in making these observations. I, like many Zambians, celebrated the change in 2021. But we cannot be so wedded to our hopes that we ignore the evidence before our eyes. Democracy requires eternal vigilance, and right now, that vigilance is desperately needed." He also addressed critics who might accuse him of being politically motivated. "My loyalty is not to any party, it is to Zambian democracy. If that means calling out a government I once supported, so be it. Silence in the face of democratic erosion is complicity." The reactions to Dr. Sishuwa's post have been swift and divided. Supporters of his analysis have flooded social media with their own concerns, sharing anecdotes of harassment, intimidation, and what they perceive as selective application of the law. One civil society activist commented, "Dr. Sishuwa is saying what many of us have been afraid to say publicly. The atmosphere of fear is real." Meanwhile, UPND supporters have pushed back vigorously, with some dismissing Dr. Sishuwa as a disgruntled academic, others suggesting he's being used by opposition forces, and still others questioning his patriotism. Deeper analysis, implications and reactions. So what are we really looking at here? What does this mean for Zambia, for Southern Africa, for democracy on the continent? First, let's acknowledge the context. Zambia's 2026 elections come at a precarious moment, not just for Zambia, but for democracy globally. Around the world, we're seeing democratic backsliding, the rise of authoritarian populism, and the erosion of democratic norms in countries that once seemed immune. Political analysts have pointed to several specific concerns that lend credibility to Dr. Sishuwa's warnings. The use of law enforcement against opposition figures. There have been reports of opposition leaders being arrested on what critics call flimsy or politically motivated charges. This mirrors tactics used by the previous Patriotic Front government that the UPND once condemned. Control of the Electoral Commission of Zambia. Questions have been raised about the independence of the ECZ and whether its composition and decisions favor the ruling party. In any democracy, the credibility of the electoral body is paramount. Media restrictions and intimidation. Independent journalists have reported increased pressure, with some facing legal action or harassment for covering stories critical of the government. Selective application of anti-corruption measures. While the UPND campaigned heavily on fighting corruption, critics argue that anti-corruption efforts have disproportionately targeted opposition figures while allegedly overlooking questionable dealings within ruling party circles. But here's where it gets complicated. The UPND government vehemently denies these accusations. They point to their economic reforms, infrastructure projects, and efforts to improve Zambia's international standing. They argue that what critics call repression is simply the rule of law being applied fairly for the first time in years. A UPND spokesperson might argue, "Every arrest we make is based on evidence. Every legal action follows due process." The difference between us and the PF is that we actually believe in accountability, even when it's uncomfortable. So we're left with competing narratives. Is this a government earnestly trying to reform a broken system while facing unfair criticism? Or is this a case of liberators becoming oppressors, of a party that has tasted power and will do anything to keep it? Dr. Sishuwa's warning raises profound questions about the nature of democratic transitions in Africa. There's a pattern we've seen before: opposition movements that fight for democracy, finally win power, and then gradually or rapidly adopt the very authoritarian methods they once opposed. Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe. Uganda under Yoweri Museveni. Even Ethiopia under Abiy Ahmed has shown troubling signs. The list is sobering. The question isn't whether the UPND is as bad as these examples, it's whether Zambia is on a similar trajectory, and whether there's still time to correct course. For ordinary Zambians, the stakes couldn't be higher. This is about more than politics. It's about whether their votes will truly count in 2026, whether they can speak freely without fear, whether their children will inherit a democracy or something much darker. So viewers, that's the situation unfolding in Zambia right now. A prominent historian warning of electoral manipulation. A government defending its record. And a nation watching nervously as 2026 approaches. Thank you so much for watching this edition of InspirAfrica Official. This is the kind of story that demands our attention, our critical thinking, and our continued vigilance. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think Dr. Sishuwa's warnings are justified, or is this an overreaction? For those of you in Zambia or who follow Zambian politics closely, what are you seeing on the ground? Are these concerns reflected in your daily reality? And for all of us across Africa and beyond, what lessons should we take from this? How do we hold governments accountable while also giving them space to govern? Where's the line between healthy skepticism and destructive cynicism? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have a respectful, informed discussion about democracy, accountability, and the future we want to see for Africa. We'll be following this story closely as we approach the 2026 elections, and I'll be back here tomorrow with more news, more analysis, and more of the stories that matter. Until then, this is Nakash, reminding you to stay informed, stay engaged, and never take democracy for granted.